had always thought that my marriage was built on something unshakable, the kind of love that people dream about. When I met him, it felt like fate had orchestrated the entire thing. His smile was infectious, his laugh a melody I never grew tired of. We fit perfectly, like two puzzle pieces that were always meant to be together. I remember the first time we moved in together, how his hand felt warm in mine, how we would spend hours talking about everything and nothing. He was my best friend, my lover, my confidant. In his eyes, I could see a future, our future. We built a life together. I gave him everything. I stood by him when times were tough, celebrated every success, and held him in my arms when he failed. I thought that was what love was, a partnership, a promise. But that promise began to crack without me noticing, slowly at first. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. It was the small things at first, the way he would come home later than usual or how he would get distracted when I spoke to him. His eyes would wander like he wasn't really there with me. I told myself I was being paranoid. He loved me, right? We had built so much together. But then, one evening, I caught him looking at his phone and quickly turning it away when I entered the room. That small action pierced me more than I could admit. I tried to ignore it, to brush it off as nothing. Maybe it was just stress from work. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. It wasn't long before I began snooping. I hated myself for doing it, but my instincts told me something was wrong. One night, after he had fallen asleep, I grabbed his phone from the bedside table. His password was no longer the one it used to be, another red flag, but I ignored it. I tried to convince myself that I was just being insecure. But as I scrolled through his messages, I found the truth. His words to her were full of affection, things I hadn't heard in months. I miss you. Can't wait to see you again. I love how you make me feel. The woman he was speaking to wasn't me. She wasn't even someone I knew. My heart sank. I remember the exact moment I realized what was happening. I felt like I had been sucker punched. My chest tightened, and the world around me seemed to fade. How could this happen? How could the man I had built everything with betray me like this? The love of my life, the person I trusted most in the world, was in love with someone else. It wasn't a moment of realization. It was a slow, suffocating death of everything I thought I knew. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there, staring at the phone in complete disbelief. The tears wouldn't stop. The betrayal tasted like salt in my mouth, and the pain, it was unbearable. How could he do this? How could he throw away everything for a stranger? The next morning, I confronted him. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I needed answers. I needed to hear it from him, even though I already knew the truth. I remember the look on his face when I asked him about the messages. His eyes darted away from mine, avoiding my gaze. That was all the confirmation I needed. He denied it at first, tried to tell me I was imagining things, but there was no denying it now. I showed him the phone, the messages, the proof. He didn't even seem sorry, not the way I had hoped. His face, instead of showing guilt, was filled with an emotion I didn't recognize, anger. He was angry that I had confronted him, that I had found out his secret. He didn't try to apologize to make it right. Instead, he said the words that would haunt me forever. I don't love you anymore. I want to be with her. The ground beneath me seemed to fall away. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was drowning. In the span of a few minutes, my entire world shattered. The man I had loved, the man I had given everything for, no longer wanted me. He was choosing her over me. The following days felt like a blur. I was a shell of the woman I once was. The pain was excruciating. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was him with her, their laughter, their love, things I had once shared with him. I thought about the life we had built, the home, the memories, the shared dreams, and realized it all meant nothing to him anymore. He moved out a week later. The house we had built together, the home that had once been filled with love, now felt cold and empty. The silence was suffocating. I sat in our bedroom, alone, in the same bed we had once shared, and I tried to piece together how this had happened. His departure didn't bring relief. Instead, it left me feeling hollow, like a part of me had been torn away. There was no closure, no apology, no remorse, just the cold reality that he was gone and I was left to pick up the pieces. The next few months were a blur of legal papers, counseling, and an unbearable sense of loss. I couldn't escape the constant reminder of what he had done to me. Friends, family, everyone knew about the affair, and the pity in their eyes was more painful than the betrayal itself. I didn't want their sympathy. I just wanted him back, though I knew deep down I could never have him the way he was. It was during this time that I began to change. The woman I had been, strong, hopeful, loving, began to fade. I became someone else. Someone who had been hurt so deeply that I couldn't remember what it felt like to trust or love again. I hated what he had turned me into, a shell of my former self. But the worst part wasn't losing him, it was losing me. In my quest to love him, I had forgotten who I was. I had given up everything to make him happy, and in the end, I was left with nothing. I spent hours thinking about what had gone wrong. Where had I failed? Was it me? Was I not enough? But deep inside, I knew the truth. It wasn't me, it was him. He had chosen to hurt me, and no matter how much I blamed myself, the fault lay with him. He had made the decision to betray me. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I tried to fill the emptiness with work, with friends, with distractions, but nothing worked. The pain never went away. It was always there, lurking, reminding me of what I had lost. And then one day, I realized something that would change everything. I didn't want to be the victim anymore. I didn't want to be the woman who had been abandoned, betrayed, left with nothing. I wanted to take back control of my life. I wanted to rise from the ashes and show him, show everyone, that I was stronger than he had ever thought. It was time for me to let go of the past. Time to stop mourning the man who never truly loved me the way I deserved. It was time for me to reclaim my life. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would take me to a place I never thought I'd go. A place where revenge, justice, and self-discovery would collide in the most unexpected way. And as I prepared to move forward, I had no idea just how much this journey would change me and him. It's strange how something so monumental can hit you with such force, yet at the same time, feel like it's happening to someone else. The days after the confrontation felt surreal. I was floating through a world that no longer made sense. My mind replayed those moments, trying to piece them together, but the puzzle remained incomplete. I kept asking myself, how could he do this to me? The reality of it all hit me hard when the divorce papers came. The cold, sterile words on the page felt like a slap in the face. He had moved on already, leaving me behind in the rubble of what was once our life. It wasn't enough that he had broken my heart, he had to make sure he took everything with him. The house, the shared bank accounts, everything we had built together, he was trying to claim it all. But he had no idea what was coming. At first, I tried to keep my head above water. I put on a brave face when people asked me how I was doing. "I'm fine," I would say, though I wasn't fine at all. I was broken, hollow, and lost. The pain of his betrayal was like a constant ache in my chest, a dull reminder of the love I had given him and how easily it had been discarded. It was the kind of hurt that made you question your entire worth. What made it worse was how little he seemed to care. He was so calm, almost too calm, as if the divorce was nothing more than a business transaction to him. There were no apologies, no regrets, just cold indifference. I had imagined that, at some point, he would feel some guilt, some sorrow for what he was doing. But no. He was too busy starting his new life, making plans with her. He barely looked back at the wreckage he had left behind. I had always believed that he loved me. How could he love me and still walk away so easily? I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, to fight for us, but I knew that would be futile. The man I had loved no longer existed. He was replaced by a stranger. A man so consumed with his own desires that he was willing to burn everything down to get what he wanted. And the worst part? I was the one left to pick up the pieces. The first few weeks after he left were the hardest. I spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. What had gone wrong? Had I missed the signs? Was I blind to his neglect, to the slow but steady erosion of our bond? I began to replay every moment we had shared together. Had he always been like this? Had he been hiding his true feelings, masking them with fake affection and false promises? One night, after what felt like hours of agonizing self-reflection, I found myself sitting in the kitchen with a glass of wine in hand, staring at the empty space where his things used to be. The weight of it all, his lies, his infidelity, his abandonment, hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just grieving the loss of my husband, I was mourning the death of a dream. That was the moment I decided I would not be his victim. I had to take control of my life, of the narrative. I couldn't let him walk away unscathed. I couldn't let him destroy me and get away with it. For the first time since the divorce, I felt a spark of anger. And that anger, I realized, would be my strength. The legal battles began soon after. I knew I had to fight for my rights, for what was rightfully mine. He had already moved on, but I wasn't ready to let go without a fight. I hired a lawyer, someone who could help me navigate the mess he had left behind. The court hearings were cold, clinical, and painful, but they also gave me a sense of purpose. As much as I hated being in that courtroom, as much as it made my stomach turn to see him sitting on the other side, I knew it was necessary. I had to face him, had to look him in the eye, and make him understand that I wasn't going to let him get away with this. Every time we met, I was struck by how different he had become. His posture had changed, his demeanor colder, more distant. It was as if the man I had once known had disappeared, replaced by someone unrecognizable. And every time I saw him with her, his new partner, I felt a twinge of jealousy, of pain, but also of disgust. She was the one who had taken my place, and it made me sick to see her by his side, sitting there with the same confident smile that once belonged to me. In the court hearings, I was forced to confront the truth that I had been avoiding for so long. He had never loved me the way I loved him. His affair wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage, it was a betrayal of everything I had given him. My trust, my heart, my soul, all of it had been given to him without question, but in return, he had treated me like I was disposable. I remember one hearing in particular. I was sitting in the courtroom, feeling the weight of the moment, when my lawyer handed me a piece of paper. It was a document detailing the settlement, his proposal for what he wanted. It was everything he had asked for, and it was unfair. It was an attempt to strip me of everything, to make sure I got as little as possible. I stared at it, the anger building inside me. How dare he? After everything, he still thought he could control me. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I had cried enough for both of us. Instead, I stood up, my voice shaking but strong, and I refused to accept the settlement. I would not let him have the last word. This was my life, my future, and I would fight for it. But even in the midst of my anger, there was a small part of me that still loved him. A part of me that couldn't fully let go, that clung to the memories of the man I had married. I hated myself for that, but it was true, and it made the betrayal hurt even more. Days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. My life had been reduced to legal battles, endless paperwork, and the constant reminder of what had happened. The hardest part was watching him move on so easily, as if our entire life together had meant nothing. Every time I saw him with her, my heart broke all over again. But something inside me was starting to shift. I couldn't keep living in the past, trapped in a cycle of anger and sorrow. I needed to move forward to reclaim my life. And that's when the idea began to form, the idea of taking back control, not just of my life, but of everything he had taken from me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. He had ruined my life, but that didn't mean I had to let him destroy my future too. I would fight back, not just with words, but with actions. I didn't know exactly what that would look like yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I wouldn't let him get away with it. I wouldn't let him walk away without consequences. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This was not just about a divorce, this was about regaining my dignity. And I was going to do whatever it took to get it back. The divorce was the hardest thing I had ever gone through. It wasn't just about the end of a marriage, it was the end of a dream, of a life I had built with someone who had once promised to love me forever. Every day felt like a battle. The courtroom became my battleground, and I was ready to fight for what was mine. I would no longer be the woman who let someone walk all over her. I remember the first day of the official proceedings. I stood outside the courthouse, heart pounding in my chest, my hands clammy. I had no idea what to expect. The last time I had seen him was during our confrontation. Since then, we had exchanged nothing but legal documents. He had already moved on, his life with her progressing as if I had never existed. Every time I thought about that, a bitter taste filled my mouth. Walking into the courtroom felt like stepping into a foreign land. The cold, impersonal atmosphere made everything seem worse. The judge, the lawyers, the papers, they were all reminders that my life had been torn apart by the very person I trusted most. The man I had loved wasn't there anymore. The man sitting across from me was a stranger. I glanced at him for a moment and the anger surged. He didn't even look guilty. In fact, he barely looked at me at all. His eyes were focused on the woman sitting in the gallery, his new love. She was smiling at him, her presence almost mocking. My throat tightened as I tried to fight back the tears. The lawyer I had hired was a woman, strong, determined, and fiercely protective of her clients. She told me that I needed to stay focused, that I had to let go of the emotional pain and think logically. But how could I? How could I not feel the weight of betrayal, of watching the man I had given everything to turn his back on me without a second thought? "Your Honor," my lawyer began, her voice steady as she addressed the judge, "my client seeks what is rightfully hers. She's entitled to half of the assets, including the house, which she helped build and maintain for years. She was part of that life, and she deserves to walk away with what she contributed to it." I held my breath as the judge nodded and asked my husband for his input. He didn't speak much. His lawyer did most of the talking, trying to minimize my claim. They argued that the money was his, that he had worked for it, and that I didn't deserve a share. "Are you seriously going to sit there and tell me that I had no part in this?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. My voice cracked as I addressed him directly, and I felt the sting of humiliation. "I gave you everything, and you're going to act like I was just some passive observer. You took everything from me, everything." The judge looked at me for a moment, and I could see that my outburst had caught him off guard. But I didn't care. I was tired of being polite, of pretending that everything was okay. My world had been shattered, and I was going to make sure he knew the depth of his actions. The hearing continued for hours, each moment more excruciating than the last. The tension between us was palpable. We weren't just dividing assets, we were dividing our entire life. Every question, every answer, felt like a reminder of what I had lost. But through it all, something inside me began to change. I realized that this wasn't just about the house or the money. This was about reclaiming my dignity. I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything. I wasn't going to let him take my self-respect, along with the life he had stolen from me. The hearings dragged on for weeks. Every time we met, I felt like I was sinking deeper into the quicksand of this divorce. He became more distant, his coldness more apparent. I could see him pretending to be unaffected, pretending that he didn't care about me anymore. But I knew better. I began to notice things, small things that reminded me of who he really was. He would look at his phone during the hearings, texting her, acting like I wasn't even there. And every time I saw him with her, I felt a mix of rage and sorrow. She was the one who had taken my place. She was the one who had broken everything we had. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But I couldn't keep dwelling on it. I couldn't let his new life, his new happiness, eat me alive. I had to stay focused. I had to keep pushing forward, for myself, for the woman I was determined to become. I spent my nights lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if I would ever be able to forgive him. The thought of forgiveness seemed impossible. How could I forgive the man who had betrayed me so deeply, who had walked away from everything we had built together without a second thought? But slowly, I began to understand something. Forgiveness wasn't about him. It wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the chains he had placed around my heart. I didn't have to forgive him right away, but I had to let go of the anger. Holding onto it only gave him power over me, and I had already given him too much. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to let him take everything from me. If he wanted to walk away with her, that was his choice. But I would not let him leave with my dignity, my pride, or my future. I was going to fight back. I was going to make sure that when this divorce was over, I would walk away stronger than I had ever been before. I didn't know how I would do it yet, but I was determined. I had been broken, but I wasn't beyond repair. As the days passed, I began to prepare. I reached out to a financial advisor to help me understand the value of everything we owned. I made sure I had a plan for my future, a plan that didn't involve him. I started taking care of myself again, focusing on my own health and well-being. For the first time in months, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. The divorce was far from over, but I was no longer the woman who sat idly by, watching as the man I loved destroyed everything. I was stronger now. I was fighting for what was rightfully mine, and I wasn't going to stop until I had it. I had never imagined that I would be in this position. Never in a million years did I think I would be sitting in my lawyer's office, planning a strategy to take my ex-husband down. But life, it seemed, had a way of turning things upside down. I couldn't sit back and let him walk away from this unscathed. He had destroyed me, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The anger that had built up inside me during the divorce proceedings was no longer something I could ignore. It had transformed into something else, something powerful, something I could use. I had spent so many nights wondering if he truly deserved to be punished for what he had done. Part of me wanted to see him suffer, wanted him to feel the weight of his betrayal, but another part of me just wanted peace. But I realized that peace wasn't something I was going to find by letting him slip away. He had taken so much from me, my trust, my love, my sense of self-worth. It was time for him to pay. My lawyer, Carla, had been with me through every step of this journey. She was fierce, focused, and unrelenting in her pursuit of justice. It had taken some time for me to admit that I needed to fight back, to take control of my destiny. But once the idea of revenge took root, I knew I couldn't stop. This wasn't just about money or property anymore, it was about restoring my dignity. And the only way to do that was to make him pay for what he had done. The first thing I did was secure my financial future. Carla had helped me understand that, while the divorce would inevitably strip me of some things, I still had the ability to claim what was mine. He might have wanted to take everything, but I wasn't going to let him. I worked with a financial planner to make sure I was protected. I made sure my name was removed from the joint accounts and placed my assets in accounts only I could access. But then came the hardest part, cutting him off financially. I knew he depended on me in some ways, particularly with our shared investments. He was reckless with money, always buying the latest gadgets, living a lifestyle that was above his means. I had always been the one to keep things grounded, to keep the budget balanced. But now, I would use that against him. I contacted the investment firm where we had our joint accounts and transferred everything into my name. I had a lawyer draft the documents and send them to the firm. It was a legal move, one that was completely within my rights, but I knew how much it would hurt him. His life was built on these investments, and without them, he would lose everything. He would have no choice but to come crawling back to me, desperate for help. The satisfaction I felt in that moment was bittersweet. Part of me wanted to see him suffer, to watch as the man who had destroyed my life crumbled. But another part of me, the part I was still trying to hold on to, wanted peace. I wanted to be able to walk away from this without feeling any more hatred, but I knew it wasn't possible. Not yet. The next step was the house. I had always loved our home. It was where we had built our lives, where we had shared our dreams and hopes for the future. But that house had also become a symbol of the betrayal that had torn my world apart. I couldn't bear the thought of him walking away with it. He didn't deserve it. I reached out to a real estate agent and made arrangements to sell the house. It wasn't easy. There were so many memories tied to that place, so many moments I had shared with him. But every time I walked through the rooms, I was reminded of how much he had taken from me. I couldn't live in that house anymore. It was time to let it go. When the offer came in, I signed the papers without hesitation. It was done. The house was sold. And I knew that once the sale went through, I would have the financial freedom to move on. I could finally start over. The house was no longer his to control. It was mine. The final act of revenge came when I decided to cut off his access to our mutual friends. For years, I had shared my life with people who had also become his friends. We had built a network together, supported each other, and created memories. But now, it felt like they had all chosen sides. He had the new woman, the new life, and now he was trying to take everything else with him. I made sure to inform our mutual friends about what had happened. I didn't go into details, didn't need to. I simply told them the truth, that he had betrayed me, that he had chosen someone else over me, and that I would no longer tolerate being associated with someone who could treat me like that. Some of our friends rallied behind me, others turned their backs, but it didn't matter anymore. The people who mattered were the ones who stood by me, the ones who believed in me even when I couldn't believe in myself. It was a strange kind of peace that came over me. I had fought back, and now I could breathe a little easier. I didn't have to live in fear of him coming back, of him trying to manipulate me again. I had learned my lesson the hard way, but I had learned it. I wouldn't let him have that kind of power over me ever again. But even as the anger faded, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still missing something. I had taken everything from him, his money, his friends, his home, but I hadn't taken the one thing that would truly hurt him, his happiness. The woman he had left me for was still in the picture, still living the life that had once been mine. And no matter what I did, that would never change. I had fought to get back control, to take back what was mine, but I knew deep down that I would never truly be free of him. Not while she was still in his life. But for the first time in months, I realized something that had eluded me for so long. I didn't need him anymore. I had rebuilt my life. I had reclaimed my strength. And now I was ready to move forward. I wasn't going to keep fighting this battle. The war was over. I had won. And though the pain still lingered, I had learned something profound. Revenge wasn't about destroying him, it was about destroying the hold he had on me. And I had done that. It was over. The days leading up to his wedding felt like a strange mix of grief and anger. I knew the day was coming, the day he would finally marry her. The woman who had stolen him from me, the woman who had been the catalyst for the destruction of my life. I thought I would be relieved once it happened, but instead, I felt a deep sense of unease. The thought of him standing at the altar, looking at her with the same love he had once reserved for me, was unbearable. I didn't know what I expected from this day. I thought I might feel joy at the thought of finally putting an end to this chapter of my life. I thought I might feel anger, burning, unrelenting rage at what he had done. But instead, I felt an overwhelming emptiness, a hollowness that I couldn't explain. The morning of his wedding, I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed. The house felt too quiet, too still. I kept staring at my phone, at the message notifications from friends and family who had heard the news. They all congratulated him, and I couldn't help but feel a sharp pang of jealousy. How could they all be so quick to forgive him, to forget what he had done? How could they act like nothing had happened? I couldn't understand it. How could anyone look at him, at his new life, and believe that it was okay? How could they be so blind? It felt like the whole world was moving on without me, leaving me to deal with the fallout of his choices alone. I tried to pull myself together. I put on a dress that I hadn't worn in months and forced myself to go outside. I needed to do something, anything, to distract myself from the reality of his wedding. As I walked through the streets, my mind raced. I couldn't escape the images of him with her, the way he had looked at her, the way he had promised her everything he had once promised me. I had been thinking about his wedding for weeks. I had tried to prepare myself for it, tried to tell myself that it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than I cared to admit. The truth was, I wasn't ready for him to move on. I wasn't ready for him to be happy with someone else while I was still sitting here, trying to pick up the pieces of a life that he had shattered. I spent most of the day avoiding my phone, avoiding anyone who might want to talk to me about it. I didn't want their sympathy. I didn't want to hear how wonderful they thought he was for moving on so quickly. I didn't want to be reminded of the life I had lost. As the evening approached, I found myself sitting alone in my living room. The silence was deafening. I stared at the clock, counting down the minutes until his wedding. It felt like time was standing still, and yet it was moving so quickly. Every tick of the clock was another reminder that he was getting married, that he was beginning a new life without me. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let myself be consumed by the thoughts of him and her, of their new life together. I needed to do something, anything, to make this feeling go away. I decided to go for a walk, to clear my head, to find some peace, even if it was just for a few minutes. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts swirling around in my mind. I couldn't shake the image of him in a tuxedo, standing at the altar with her, exchanging vows. The thought made my stomach churn. How could he stand there, so confidently, knowing what he had done to me? How could he look at her and promise her forever, when he had broken every promise he had ever made to me? I kept walking, my feet carrying me further away from my house, from everything that reminded me of him. As the sun began to set, the weight of the day started to settle in. The anger, the sadness, it all hit me like a wave, crashing over me until I was gasping for air. I stopped by a park bench and sat down, staring out at the horizon. I didn't want to think about him anymore. I didn't want to think about their wedding, about the life they would build together. But I couldn't help it. Every part of me was consumed by the thought of them. That's when I heard it, the sound of someone approaching. I turned my head and saw a man walking toward me. He was tall, his features sharp, his face familiar. It took me a moment, but then I recognized him. It was him, my ex-husband's old friend, someone I had known back when we were still together. He had always been there, a quiet presence in the background, but I hadn't seen him in years. He stopped in front of me, a concerned look on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. I wasn't sure how to answer. I was okay. I hadn't been okay for a long time, but there was something about his presence that made me feel less alone, even if just for a moment. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile, "just thinking." He sat down next to me, keeping a respectful distance. "I know it's not my place," he said, "but I wanted to check in on you. I know today must be hard." I didn't know what to say to that. He was right. It was hard. It was more than hard. It was like I was being torn apart all over again. "I can't stop thinking about it," I admitted, my voice trembling. "About him, about her, about the wedding. It feels like everything is slipping away from me, and I can't do anything to stop it." He didn't say anything at first, just nodded as if he understood. Then, after a long pause, he spoke again. "You deserve better than him." The words hit me harder than I expected. I looked at him, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was something in his gaze, something kind and understanding. "You deserve someone who will love you the way you deserve to be loved. You deserve someone who will choose you, who will fight for you, not someone who will throw everything away for someone else." I wasn't sure why, but those words meant more to me than I could explain. It wasn't that I wanted him, not really. It was the fact that someone, anyone, was acknowledging my pain, seeing me for who I was, not just as the wife who had been left behind. "Thank you," I whispered. "I needed to hear that." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It felt like a small, quiet moment of peace, something I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. The weight of everything wasn't gone, but for the first time, I didn't feel completely lost. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about what he had said. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the truth behind them. I had spent so much time focusing on my ex-husband, on what he had done to me, that I had forgotten to think about myself. I had forgotten that I deserved better. I couldn't control what had happened between us. I couldn't undo the betrayal, the pain, the heartbreak, but I could control what happened next. I could choose to move forward, to heal, and to let go of the past. I could choose to find happiness again. And with that, a small, quiet part of me began to heal. I thought the worst pain had already passed. I was wrong. 2 days after the wedding, my phone rang at a time when the world was still quiet, when grief usually speaks the loudest. I almost didn't answer. I had learned that nothing good ever came from calls I wasn't expecting. But something in my chest tightened, the same instinct that had once warned me about his lies. I picked up. It was the man from the park. "I need to talk to you," he said. His voice wasn't gentle this time. It was strained, urgent. "Not over the phone." We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, one of those places where people go when they don't want to be seen. He arrived early. His hands trembled as he stirred his coffee, even though he hadn't taken a single sip. "I didn't come to comfort you that night," he began. "I came because I couldn't live with myself anymore." My heart began to race. "What do you mean?" He looked at me, really looked at me, as if weighing whether I deserved the truth. "Your ex-husband didn't just betray you emotionally. Everything he did was planned." The words landed softly, but they cut deep. "He was in debt long before the affair," he continued. "Bad debt, gambling, risky investments. You saved him more times than you know. Every time you covered a loss, every time you signed something without asking questions, you kept him afloat." My throat went dry. I remembered those nights. The promises, the excuses, the way he'd kiss my forehead and say, "I'll fix it, I just need time." "The mistress," he went on, "she wasn't just a lover. She was part of the escape plan. She had money, connections, he needed her. And once he secured her, he needed you gone." I felt dizzy. "No," I whispered. "He said he fell out of love." That was easier to sell than the truth. The cafe seemed to blur around me. Every sacrifice I had made suddenly replayed in my mind with new meaning. The late nights I worked, the savings I drained, the blind trust I offered like a gift. "He delayed the divorce on purpose," the man said. "He was waiting for you to finalize the financial transfers. He needed your signature, your patience, your love." I laughed, but it sounded broken. So when I cut him off, "You ruined everything." For the first time since the wedding, I smiled, but there was no joy in it, only a quiet, devastating clarity. "He married her because he had no other choice," he added. "She demanded it, once she realized he had nothing left." My chest tightened again, not with jealousy this time, but with grief for the woman I used to be. The one who loved without armor. The one who believed loyalty was mutual. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because he blamed you. He told everyone you destroyed him, that you were vindictive. Cold. He still talks about you like you're the villain." I looked down at my hands. They were steady. Strong, not the hands of a victim anymore. "Did you know," I said quietly, "that I still blamed myself for not being enough?" He shook his head. "You were too much, too generous, too loyal. Men like him don't know what to do with that." That night, alone in my apartment, the truth settled into me like a slow-burning fire. I cried, but not the way I used to. These tears weren't begging. They were releasing. I finally understood something I had been too broken to see before. He didn't leave because I failed. He left because I stopped being useful. And that realization hurt more than the affair ever did. Days later, I received an email from him. He wanted to talk. I agreed. We met in a neutral place, a glass-walled restaurant where nothing could be hidden. He looked different, older, smaller somehow. The confidence he once wore like armor had cracked. "You've ruined my life," he said without greeting. I studied him carefully. The man who had once been my entire world now looked like a stranger I no longer feared. "No," I replied. "I stopped saving it." His jaw tightened. "You knew what would happen." I knew what I deserved. He leaned forward. "She regrets marrying me." I said nothing. "She found out about the debts, about everything." Still, I remained silent. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally. That was when something inside me broke for good. "You planned it," I said calmly. "You used my love like a credit card. You cheated, you lied. And when I stopped paying the bill, you called it cruelty." His eyes flickered. "I loved you in my own way." I stood up. "That was the problem. Your way was always about taking." I left him there, staring at his reflection in the glass. For the first time, I didn't look back. That night, I slept without dreams. No memories haunted me, no imagined conversations replayed, just silence, peaceful, unfamiliar silence. I understood now that revenge hadn't been the goal. Truth was. And truth had freed me in ways anger never could. But the story wasn't over yet. Because some wounds don't close quietly. Some lessons demand to be witnessed. And soon, the world would see him for who he truly was. The silence after the confrontation with him was louder than any argument we'd ever had. There was no back and forth, no desperate attempts at salvaging the wreckage of what was once our life. It was final. It was over. I had said everything I needed to say, and for the first time, I didn't need to hear his excuses. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need closure. The truth had already set me free, and it was enough. I walked away from that meeting feeling different, as if something heavy had been lifted from my shoulders. The weight of betrayal, of regret, had been replaced by a strange sense of empowerment. I had taken control back. I had finally, unequivocally, stopped letting him dictate my emotions. But the healing didn't happen overnight. The scars he left were deep, and while I had fought back, I still had to reconcile the damage that had been done. The days after our meeting were a blur. I kept busy, diving into my work, spending time with friends who had stuck by me, doing anything to keep my mind occupied. But at night, when everything was quiet, the memories crept back in. It was inevitable. I'd find myself replaying the years we had spent together, wondering where it had gone wrong, why I had let it go on for so long. I could have walked away sooner, I thought. I should have known better. But then I remembered the love we had shared at one point, the laughter, the promises. I tried to hold on to that, even if it was fatting. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below me, I received another message. It was from him. He had sent a simple text, a question that I never expected. "Can we talk?" For a moment, I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The old familiar pain stirred in my chest, but I quickly reminded myself of the woman I had become. I didn't need to talk to him. I didn't need his validation or his empty apologies. I had already made my peace. So why was I even considering responding? I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, torn between the woman I was before all of this, vulnerable, trusting, and the woman I was now, strong, independent, and no longer willing to settle for less than what I deserved. I realized in that moment that the past was always going to haunt me, no matter how much I tried to avoid it. But I didn't need to let it control me anymore. I didn't need him to give me answers I'd already found on my own. I deleted the message without responding. And with that small, seemingly insignificant action, I realized something that had eluded me all along. I didn't need closure from him. The closure I had been waiting for was already inside me. It had always been there. I just had to find the strength to stop seeking it from someone who would never be able to give it to me. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The legal proceedings continued, and as expected, they dragged on longer than I had hoped. But I no longer felt the same dread I had once felt about facing him. I no longer feared his attempts to manipulate or guilt-trip me. I had learned to stand my ground. And the more I stood up for myself, the more I realized that I was capable of so much more than I had ever given myself credit for. In the middle of it all, I found myself looking back not to the past, but to the woman I used to be before all of this happened. I remembered how confident I had been, how full of life. I had lost her for a while, buried beneath the weight of betrayal and heartbreak. But now, I was starting to rediscover her, piece by piece. I had forgotten how much I had to offer the world, how much love, passion, and strength I had within me. I had let someone else's actions define me for far too long. But not anymore. It was then that I realized the most important lesson of all. I was enough. I had always been enough. The love I had given him wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of who I was, generous, caring, and capable of great love. But the mistake I had made was thinking that love was all I needed. I had given him my heart, but in return, I had sacrificed my own sense of self. I had let him define my worth, and that was a mistake I would never make again. The more I embraced this new version of myself, the stronger I became. I began to focus on what truly mattered to me, my career, my friendships, my passions. I took up painting again, something I had always loved but had abandoned in the chaos of my marriage. I started writing again, filling notebook after notebook with thoughts, ideas, and reflections. It was therapeutic, a way of reclaiming my voice after years of silence. I began to travel, too. I went on solo trips to places I had always wanted to visit, taking time to reconnect with myself and the world around me. I walked through bustling markets in foreign cities, took in the sights and sounds of places I had never imagined visiting, and felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. The world felt open to me in a way it never had before. During one of these trips, I met someone new. His name was Daniel. He wasn't like anyone I had ever known. He was kind, patient, and gentle. We talked for hours, sharing stories of our lives, our struggles, and our dreams. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't try to erase the past or tell me everything would be okay. He simply listened. He allowed me to be vulnerable without judgment. And in his presence, I found something I had long forgotten: trust. But I didn't rush into anything. I wasn't looking for a replacement for the love I had lost. I wasn't looking for someone to fill the void he had left. I was simply enjoying the present, taking things one day at a time. It was a different kind of love, a love that wasn't based on expectations or desperation, but on mutual respect and understanding. As the months passed, I found myself not only healing, but thriving. The pain of the divorce still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, and in doing so, I had discovered a version of myself I had never known existed. A stronger, more resilient version of me. And in that strength, I realized something profound. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I was enough on my own. But I never forgot the lessons I had learned. The woman I had become was a result of everything I had gone through. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the pain, it had shaped me, yes, but it had also set me free. And now, as I stood on the edge of a new beginning, I knew one thing for certain: I would never let anyone, least of all him, take my power away again. The last time I saw him, it was by accident. We crossed paths at a mutual friend's gathering. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe? Regret? But I didn't care. I had already moved on, and as I walked past him, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. I simply felt nothing. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift I could have ever given myself: freedom.